Hey YouTube, I want to do a little video here about relative humidity and how it affects the drying process in a solar kiln. So I'll start a little bit from scratch, and the three principal things that affect drying lumber, and this is about a solar kiln, okay? It's not about someone who has more control over stuff. It's just a simple solar kiln. So anyway, what you're looking at here is, the first thing is temperature, okay? Temperature has a lot to do with moisture content. I'll explain that to you. Also, relative humidity, okay? Relative humidity, and then moisture content. Now, I'll start here with the moisture content. What we're looking for in moisture content in hardwood, somewhere between 6 and 8% is good for hardwood and furniture makers, and you can sell that lumber because most moisture content, if you check in a home anywhere, the furniture, cabinets, things like that, with a moisture meter, you'll find it out to be between 6 and 8%. Okay? Now, what I noticed, and you have to look this stuff up for your own use and what type of wood you use and all, but roughly and basically 32% relative humidity will get what I'm looking for here. So I need to keep the relative humidity inside of my solar kiln at around 32% in order to effectively and efficiently get it down to 6 or 8% moisture content. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example here. Today, my kiln was 130 degrees, and this is Fahrenheit, okay, inside the kiln. And when I looked in there, the relative humidity was around 45%. Now, what you need to recognize between these two things is this. Relative humidity means that there's so much moisture in the air at a given temperature, okay? So inside the kiln today, because I have a hygrometer inside there, and it tells me what the relative humidity is as well as the temperature. So this is the reading that I got when I looked at it. Oh, I don't know, I want to say probably 1 o'clock, after the sun had been beating in there for a while. It was pretty nice and warm in there. Not really significantly high, but higher than I wanted. I wanted at 32%. So what you need to understand, and you have to have this ingrained into your brain when you're working with a solar kiln, is that when the temperature goes down, like let's say overnight now the temperature might go down to maybe 80 degrees in the kiln, okay, 80. Now the reason for that is because the content or the volume of wood that's inside the solar kiln retains heat, okay? So it's not going to drop, even though outside right now it's around 58 degrees, okay? Inside the kiln it's still 80 degrees in there, alright? So, but here's the problem with this. Now, the kiln is shut down at the moment because it's 10 o'clock at night. So what happened was, this is roughly noon, okay? So now at 10 o'clock p.m. we're at 80 degrees, and the relative humidity has climbed up to 70%. Now, these numbers that I'm giving you actually were from yesterday, before I put the dehumidifier in. And what I'm going to explain to you again, so you understand this, is when the temperature goes down, relative humidity goes up. When the temperature goes up, relative humidity goes down. Now, here's how that works. Just imagine a volume of air, okay? at a given temperature, the air molecules are closer together than what they are when the temperature is hot. So in other words, well, let's just say this is a cool, let's say this is a normal temperature of, I don't know, 60 degrees. The point is you have air molecules in there. And in between the air molecules is where the water vapor is, okay? So as you get hotter and hotter, the distance between the air molecules becomes bigger. And therefore, since the space becomes bigger, just draw bigger circles here, okay? Because the space becomes bigger, more moisture can fit in this, okay? So because they give you the relative humidity according to a given temperature, as the lower the temperature goes, the higher the relative humidity goes. The higher the moisture content, well, not moisture content, the higher the water vapor is inside this on a percentage basis. So there's more water vapor in it. Alright? So once you understand that, which is a simple thing, but it's hard to remember it sometimes, just remember, temperature goes up, relative humidity goes down. Temperature goes down, relative humidity goes up. Alright, so now here's my problem. We're in a season, it's October, okay, so we have October now, and in Pennsylvania, October, November, December, January, February, and March are not considered good drying months. So what we have here is what I'm going to call fall drying conditions. Okay? Fall drying conditions. Alright, so when you have fall drying conditions, you can use the word fall and just realize that the productivity or the dryness in the drying process in your kiln is going to fall off, because the moisture content, if the temperature of the kiln goes down at night, it's going to bring more moisture into the air. Now, infiltration of your solar kiln, in other words, all the gaps and creases and vents and everything else you have that allow this to take place, is what's called infiltration. So what we want to try to do, since the temperatures are dropping in October and the drying conditions are going to be worse because the humidity in the air appears to get higher, and it's not warm enough even outside to get rid of the moisture. Okay, so then what we do what I do with my solar kiln is I add something to help this. Now I'm actually writing out the word dehumidifier, and I'll tell you why I'm doing that. Because one time, a person had a crawl space in their house, and he says to me that they were getting water vapor in the crawl space. And I said to them, you need to go and get a dehumidifier, drain it to the outside of the house, and run it all the time until you can dry things up. Well, they went and got a humidifier, not a dehumidifier, a humidifier, which pushed moisture into the air. Well, I'll tell you what, within 6 months the house was condemned because all of the floor joist and the framing members underneath the house rotted, and they were saturated with water and started to bend, because we know that dried lumber has a lot more strength than wet lumber, and it just started to bend and bow, and the center beam was, you know, sagging down about 6 inches, and it just came apart. So you want to be careful. You want a dehumidifier for in your solar kiln. Okay, so now what I do with the dehumidifier is I'm trying to get this number down to this number. Okay, I want around 32%. So what I do then, and this temperature was tonight, because the wood was warm from today. But what I found out is normally the temperature in the fall is around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the norm between the day and the night and the average of all the temperatures. So 60 degrees is about right. So if at 60 degrees, and this is part of the problem, you don't know what the relative humidity can be. It can be anything, and the temperature can be anything. There's no fixed thing. I'm not saying that at 130 degrees all relative humidity is always 45%. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at 60 degrees relative humidity is 60%. What I am saying is if you look at these numbers and you compare what you have here, there's a little bit of a correlation there. 60 and 60 is 120, 45 and 45 is 90, but I'm looking at 70 here was the actual number. So there's probably a way to calculate this thing a little bit more closely, but we're not going to worry about that because what I want to talk about right now is how to solve the problem of high humidity when you have poor drying conditions. And this past month in Pennsylvania, we have had about 4 sunny days and 28 rain days, or 28 even cloudy days. Cloudy days are just as bad as a rain day in my book because they're not drying anything up. Yes, the relative humidity on a cloudy day might be, 70% as opposed to 100% when we're having rain. But nonetheless, it's still too high to dry wood. So if I put the dehumidifier in there, and what you want to do, the key to this is to fill the kiln, okay? And if you don't have the solar kiln filled, at least put a backdrop so that the air circulates around the wood and comes up around the back. Try not to leave any gap between the wall that holds the fans, okay, and the lumber. So you want this to flow around through the lumber, back up, and come around again. So there's a number of ways, and it's very tricky because, you need to have a hygrometer outside as well as inside, okay? So if you look at this and you say to yourself, okay, if outside the relative humidity at a certain temperature, say 60, is 70%, you certainly don't want to let air go from outside to inside because all you're doing is adding more moisture to it. So in this case, what I do is I shut up my vents and close them tight, and I get the dehumidifier in there, and no matter what the sun is doing, whether it's sunny or not, I let the dehumidifier work. And for every drop of water that comes out of a dehumidifier, I look at it like this. It's 1 drop of water that's not in my lumber, okay? Now there's a lot of water in lumber, and if you read about it, you can find out that it's half of the truckload. Like say a truckload, I don't know, weighs maybe 20, or let's say it would be 20 tons roughly. I think a truck today, a triaxle, is around 23 tons if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if you want. But half of that, so like 10 to 11 tons, is water on certain kinds of species of wood. So there's a lot of water that has to be gotten rid of. So what I do is I plug my dehumidifier in, and I did it today because it's October. If anything can happen right now. I've had snow here on October 2nd that never left until the following May, okay? So, and then I've had snow in October, and by Halloween it's 60 degrees out or 70 degrees at night. So it's crazy, but you got to do something to try and maintain these temperatures because those are the oddball temperatures. So basically when you're looking at this thing, what I would recommend is you put a meter with a thermometer with a relative humidity gauge outside and one inside. Now I have one outside because I use it for the greenhouse. So I can compare that one with what's inside the solar kiln. And I do that and it lets me know whether the kiln has less humidity in it than what the air does outside. Because like I say, let's say the relative humidity outside is 20%, okay? I definitely want that air to be introduced to the kiln if the relative humidity in there is at 60%. You know, it doesn't make sense. You want to get that air in there. So in that case, I would vent that. But anyway, getting back to the fall, because fall drying conditions are lower than what they are in the summer, you put the dehumidifier in, you leave it run, and try not to open your kiln. Have it filled, and then go with trying to see what this relative humidity happens at all temperatures. I would say the best time to check it is at noontime. My kiln starts to run at 7 o'clock in the morning. Okay, check it at noontime, and then check it maybe 7 o'clock at night right before you would go in the house because it's dark, something like that. And write those numbers down. Every day do that. And do it for, you know, like the different seasons. For now, we're coming into October, so you'd want to do it now. And then compare that to the other meter that's outside with the temperatures and also the relative humidity. Just so you know what's going on outside the kiln, okay? When you know what's going outside the kiln, it'll help you to know whether you should introduce some of that air or not. But what I try to do is I try to eliminate that problem and that concern, and I just put the dehumidifier in there and watch this relative humidity. It almost always goes down. When I put the dehumidifier in there, you know, if you have a really rainy day, you'll have some infiltration, and like I said, infiltration is wherever air can get into that kiln, and it can get in there. It doesn't matter how you build it, it's going to get in. I mean, you could make it, I guess, airtight, but what purpose would it serve? So the thing is you want to try and get the relative humidity down to 32% and keep it there, regardless of the temperature. Now during the day, like let's say we have a nice bright sunny day and it's 60 degrees and this is 32%, okay? The sun comes out, drives the temperature up to 130 and cuts this in half, maybe down to 15% or 20%. What happens with that? Well, you're talking about a period of time maybe from 11 o'clock in the morning till like say 2 o'clock in the afternoon that this is actually going to take place. Now the lumber itself will take on some of that heat, but a couple of hours, like 4 hours of 140 degree temperatures are not going to go through that, permeate that entire pile. It may, depending upon what the temperature of the pile already is. Like I said, the temperature of the pile today inside the greenhouse this afternoon was 80 degrees after the sun stopped hitting it. And it was 80 degrees at 7 o'clock the last time I looked at it. But I'm counting that right now it's going to be 60, and I'm thinking at the moment in my kiln it's 70%. So we need to get that down, and like I say, that's where the dehumidifier comes in. So this is just a little bit of something to give you some food for thought. And everybody lives in a different area. I mean, it can be more moist living on a lakefront lot, more humidity possibly. I know that a lot of times you get a lot of fog and stuff, which is an indication of moisture in the air. So, you know, everywhere you live, you want to keep track of this stuff, every different person. It's not the same. What I do here is not going to work everywhere, but it gives you the idea of how you can change some of this stuff. Now, if my relative humidity does drop down too low, and the humidity outside is higher than that, what I'll do is open my vents and introduce some of that little bit of air that has more moisture in it into the kiln. But I might only open it for like an hour, just because my vents are very small, they're only 8 by 16. So it'll give you just enough air to be pulled in there to raise this relative humidity up. And you want to keep track of that, because once you start pulling moisture into the kiln to bring it up to like 32% or 40% or whatever, 32, 35, then you want to shut your vents. Now that's how I do it, okay? And again, You know, if you're down south or you're, you know, extremely far north, you have to work this out for yourself. So just keep track of what these temperatures and relative humidity look like, compare them, and try and figure out an average that you have. And instead of trying to work from day to day, driving yourself insane, trying to make that little needle go down to 32 every single day, work on like a week's worth of trial or 4 days worth of trial. You know, try and set things up, like if the relative humidity is high inside the kiln, try and set things up so that you're reducing that by, like I say, introducing the dehumidifier, for instance. If the relative humidity is too low and they're calling for, you know, bright sunny days, you may want to open your vents and pull some air in, especially the night air. You know, because the night air, because it cools down, is going to have more moisture in it. So if you bring in a lower temperature, and you're automatically going to be bringing more moisture or a higher humidity in, higher relative humidity in with it. It's something that you can practice, you can learn, you can watch it, and if you watch it close, you can solve your problem. To put wood into the kiln, turn the fans on, and think everything is going to be fine and dandy through rain and sleet and hailstorms and snow, especially when the snow covers the kiln over, is not practical. Think about it, it's not practical. And I'll tell you what, I have seen in my kiln in the wintertime where the temperature inside the kiln is 40 to 50 degrees in the kiln because the wood was hot from a day or two ahead, you know, or behind, and all of a sudden the kiln is covered completely with snow. I remember I was worried about the dehumidifier getting frozen inside. I didn't want it to freeze the line and water to be, you know, or either it didn't work or freeze up. I didn't want that to happen. So I was checking it, and when I pulled the snow off of it in the morning, and I do every time it snows, I pull the snow off the kiln just about the first thing as soon as I can get to it. Immediately you'll notice that the temperatures will be warmer than they are outside in a lot of cases during the winter. Now if you have some really cold days, like we had some below zero temperatures, you know, it tends to drop below 32. When it drops below 32, I take the dehumidifier out, and all I do is let the wood do what it wants to do. Sometimes it will absorb some moisture if I keep the kiln closed, the vents, and I allow the fans to run and I have some sunny days, then I'll be okay. You know, it'll absorb moisture out of there. So this is a trial and error thing because there's so many. There's only 3 variables you're concerned about, but the range of those variables that you're given can go anywhere from, you know, 30 degrees in the winter or less up to 110 degrees in the wintertime if the sun's hitting that thing all day long. So just something to think about. The other thing is what I'd like you to try to remember too, when it comes to opening and closing your kiln, if you ever watch me, you see, now I'm not always up on this, sometimes I get messed up too, but I try to cut the wood and set it onto horses that's going in the kiln. And then what I do is I'll open the kiln and put the wood in there as quickly as I can, okay? If you try to cut the wood into boards and then put it in the kiln with the kiln open, it really doesn't help you. You know, what you're doing is you're making the inside temperature or relative humidity the same as the outside. And to give you an example of that, the square footage of my kiln, now I'm talking square feet now, not cubic feet. The square feet of my kiln is roughly 140 square feet. So you're looking at, let me just think about that. It's 7 foot and it's 20 foot. Yeah, so it's 140 square feet. Okay, but the door is 100 square feet. In other words, it's a 10 by 10 door that I open up. When I pick that door open, a 10 by 10 area is allowing moisture, sun, or not moisture and cold, whatever, go into that kiln. So if you do the math on this, if you really think about this thing, this is like taking, you know, you have a home, and it would be like taking the entire side of the house on this end and this end off, and wondering if you're going to get any temperature variation. That's the difference in size there. So, you know, you can imagine how bad that can be. Just in a little example. So, I hope that this video helps to understand a little bit about the relative humidity and how it affects the wood that we have. And the person that asked me about the dehumidifier today, I laughed because a lot of times, you know, people are wondering and they ask me, and it just so happened that today I put the dehumidifier in, but last night I actually took it into our laundry room and sprayed Windex on it and cleaned it all off and everything, and I left it run in the laundry room because it was so humid in the house. And I can tell because my house is all made out of wood on the interior walls, and you can see that you can't see any seams anywhere. That's nice, but at the same time it's telling me something, okay? And I'll show you some furniture when I get a chance, one that I built when I first moved here, and I used white pine lumber that was only dried to 19%. I'm going to take pictures of it and show you what happened to it in less than 3 months' time being inside the house. It's pretty interesting because it cracked wide open, and it'll give you a good incentive to make sure that when you sell wood or when you use wood yourself, that you get the temperature, the moisture content of it down low enough that you can actually put the furniture in the house and don't have to worry about it cracking. So anyway, guys, if you have any questions on this thing, and if I can answer them, I will answer them. But I just thought that maybe this should be cleared up a little bit, since I do get questions time to time about this thing. So right now it's October. We're getting the cooler temperatures. Cooler temperatures means higher relative humidity. Cooler temperatures mean higher relative humidity. Okay, so we want to curb that by putting a dehumidifier in there. And you'll know when to take the dehumidifier out, because the temperatures of your kiln inside will start to hover near freezing, you know, at nighttime, and that you want to try to avoid. So if you're in a place that has really a lot of sun and all, you may not even have this problem. But we have this problem because our relative humidity in Pennsylvania is normally 19%. Okay? So the relative humidity being 19% is low enough to dry wood, but it doesn't stay there. You know, 19% is not low enough to get down to the 6 or 8 that we're looking for. Alright? So, at least not, you know, when it's a constant 19 hitting it. But 32% relative humidity in the kiln, with the air moving and, you know, you're pulling water out of there, this eventually changes, and it just works out pretty nicely. Like I say, I'm not trying to teach a weather class here. I'm just trying to give you some ideas of how you can make things change. So it's not hopeless when you see the numbers on the kiln, you know, relative humidity is 70%. It's not hopeless. What you have to do is act on it. And acting on anything is something my dad used to say. I would rather see you do something wrong than to do nothing at all. So at least you would learn from the mistake rather than sitting on your hands. So try these different things that I have told you about, and hopefully they'll help you to get nice lumber out of there, like the lumber that I got for my molding. Because I got to tell you, that oak is beautiful. Alright guys, that's it for today. Have a good one. Thank you very much for watching.